And hello, and welcome to episode one of. Okay, okay, but they can't understand you. Look, I know you're excited, but okay, look, I'm gonna explain it all to them. I'm gonna introduce you. Just let me do this first, okay? Okay. Hello, welcome, new listeners. The owl that you hear hooting and hollering, his name is Ulu. Say hello, Ulu. And my name's Adam, and welcome. This is episode one of Ulu's Infinite Library. And before we get in, I just felt like I needed to explain a few things, explain what this podcast is, what the point of it is, and to introduce myself and Ulu as well. So here's the deal. Ulu is an owl spirit and the steward of the Infinite Library, and he summoned me here to be the ambassador of the Infinite Library for humanity. Uh, I know that probably sounds like a lot, but I'm trying to keep it simple and straightforward here. Um, I don't really know why he picked me. To me, I'm just kind of a random average guy. I mean, I was just kind of doing odd jobs and trying to figure my life out when Ulu found me and brought me here. So I don't really have any kind of special qualifications or anything. I guess Ulu sees some kind of potential in me. Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Ulu. Um, but I don't know. I'm not like a librarian or I'm not even really an avid reader. But I don't know. Here I am, and me and Ulu have come to an understanding that I'm going to be the one hosting the podcast. So it is what it is. So I keep saying infinite library, infinite library. That seems like something impossible. What are you talking about? Um, it is kind of what it sounds like. It's a library that goes on forever. But it's also a bit more exciting than that. These are texts that exist um, throughout all of possible existence, and what that means is we have texts from alternate realities. We have texts from alternate timelines, from different planets in our universe that have life and language and intelligence, and I mean basically everything you could possibly imagine is somewhere in this library. So, the Infinite Library is kind of a physical manifestation of all of the knowledge that exists, not just in the universe, but in the multiverse, or whatever you would call it, the greater spectrum of existence, I guess. And that's what this podcast is. We share a piece of literature or an interesting piece of maybe even sometimes like journalism or uh, I don't know, an article, just a varying pieces of text from all over existence that we feel, or mainly that Ulu feels, is worth sharing with the world. And also, Ulu showed me a magic book that lets me understand Owl. So when Ulu is hooting like that, he's actually speaking a language, and I can understand it. So I can translate for him. And yeah, I don't really know how to ease you into it any better than that. Obviously, there's a lot I can explain about my life and how I ended up here in the Infinite Library with Ulu, and how me and Ulu came to this agreement of recording a podcast about books in an infinite library. There's a whole lot of backstory there, but I feel like if I tried to explain it all in episode one, uh, it's just going to be a big mess, and you're not going to be interested in listening to the story itself. So, here's what I'm thinking. The first, 5 to maybe 20 minutes maximum, between 5 and 20 minutes of every podcast will just be about the goings on in the Infinite Library, what exploring the Infinite Library is like, maybe explaining a bit about how I ended up here and why we're recording this podcast and what my life is like now. But I feel like in episode one, it's a lot to front load the entire episode with all of that and then also get into a story from the Infinite Library. Seems like a lot. So, this kind of gives you an idea of how I want the podcast to be. There'll be an intro, we'll hear a bit from me, we'll hear a bit from Ulu, And then Ulu's going to quiet down. Yeah, Ulu's going to quiet down, and we're going to read the story. It'll just be me reading the story. We're not going to have any help or interjections from Ulu. Yeah, because we talked a lot about that. It's not, people don't understand you, okay? And it's going to be annoying if they're hearing all constant owl sounds while I'm trying to read and they're trying to listen to the story, okay? Okay, yeah, he gets it. He's going to be quiet. Okay. It's just, we've tried to record it a couple times and he was not quiet the whole time. But I think we're going to be okay now. Okay, so the first story we're getting into today on Ulu's Infinite Library is a short story called Land Where the Red Moon Rises. Can you tell us a little bit about this story? Okay. He says he'll let the story speak for itself, and he's ready to get into it. So without further ado, here we go. Our first story on Ulu's Infinite Library, Land Where the Red Moon Rises. It was a beautiful spring morning on my way to work that day, but it didn't matter how sunny it was outside. In the mines, it was always dark. Every morning as I boarded the shuttle, I would watch the sun turn to darkness as it ferried us loyal workers into the depths of the scarred Mount Tempest. Many wondered how Pelican Co. hadn't already bled the mine dry. For over 3 centuries, dozens of generations chipped away at the barren stone looking for the faintest glint of the most coveted mineral. Their legacies haunted these tunnels, which stretched for miles beneath the surface, branching and spiraling like the roots of an ancient tree. Some wondered how Pelican Co. could justify the cost. Was it really still profitable? It wasn't often that I found gold. The first time I did, I called the foreman over in disbelief. After his examination, he estimated the total value of the vein I had discovered to be around $450,000. That was more money than I'd ever seen in my life, and more than enough to cover my debt to the loanster that got me into this mess. So, was it still profitable? I think so. I chipped at the rock wall steadily, like I would any other day. I hacked away at layer after layer of gray schist. It was physically demanding, tedious, and repetitive work, but it at least didn't require much thought. It was when I lifted my pickaxe over my head to strike again that I heard that god-awful scream. We had no idea where the screams were coming from. Sound carries far and becomes diffuse in such an enclosed space. The pickaxes stopped in unison as the working men turned to discern what was happening. Undoubtedly, there was a panic brewing. I listened closely. There was a certain loss of clarity when a sound rang out from deep within. These screams were deep, and whoever the poor soul was, he foretold of a collapse. My senses heightened. I felt the subtle, low rumbling. I could see the support beam starting to sway and creak. Without another thought, I ran for the surface. It wasn't long before the rumbling turned to crashing rocks and heaving support beams. I panted as I pushed my legs to take me as far and fast as they could. The loud snaps of the breaking support beams followed me as I ran for my life. Several miners followed my lead, and before long there was a trampling stampede. The hundreds of workers within all started to rush out in any way they could. The shuttle to the surface was our only hope of survival. When I reached it, I saw a dozen men already attempting to break down the door, which was bizarrely locked. In all my years working for Pelican Co., I never once saw the door refuse to open. I became concerned when I saw the shuttle start to sway back and forth as the panicking masses pushed and pulled at the stubborn machinery. If they tipped it off the railing, we'd all be doomed. Thinking fast, I took my pickaxe and swung hard at one of the tempered glass windows. My arms were practiced and toughened for this work. I was determined to break it in one swing, but the glass was thick and durable. It took 3 swings for a hairline crack to work its way up the window. With each swing, the crashing of crumbling rock grew louder, the earth shook with an aura of vengeance, and the support beams snapped like dominoes in a chain reaction. I had never been so happy to hear the sound of shattering glass. I scrambled quickly through the open window, but there were still some sharp, jagged pieces of glass. I tried to be careful, but inevitably I was scraped on my upper arms and waist. Hordes of desperate miners tried to follow me all at once. They crammed their shoulders and necks into the open, shattered window. I watched in disbelief as they ignored the glass ripping into their flesh. Blood trickled and leaked from around the window as I looked into their anguished eyes. And for a brief moment I saw wild madness.
I saw animals caught in traps, willing to chew all their limbs off if necessary. They pressed against the shuttle, and they began to seesaw the shuttle back and forth, tipping farther and farther off the track with each sway. I knew it could tip at any moment. I made a mad dash for the acceleration lever. In my haste, I tripped and stumbled over, forcing me to crawl over to the controls. I hesitated for a moment. A storm of emotions brewed within me, but ultimately I made my choice. I closed my eyes and cranked the shuttle to maximum speed. Hot steam hissed from its engine and scalded the crowd as it rattled to life. I kept my eyes closed and thought for a moment. What could I do to make up for this? What could I say? There was nothing. No answer. Nothing could atone for what I had just done. My throat tightened, and with every ounce of strength I cried out, "Please forgive me. I'm sorry," just as the shuttle lurched forward. The men groaned in anguish. I heard a man who knew my name cry out, "Damn you, Bob! Damn you!" His voice strained and raspy with rage. That was the last thing I heard before the shuttle hurried me to safety. At a max speed of 30 miles per hour, I only escaped mere seconds before the whole thing came crumbling down. As soon as I got to the surface, I quickly threw the shuttle into reverse and sent it back down in hopes of saving the others. But the shuttle never emerged. The ground continued to jostle, the trees swayed with a vengeance. Loud chaotic clatter roared from within the mine, until finally the earth swallowed it whole. It all collapsed right up to the entrance, and the shuttle, along with any survivors, were permanently entombed inside. The Pelican Cove gold mine finally said no more. With deep, heaving breaths, I fell back onto the ground and tried to process what had just happened. All of those miners had just died. I was seemingly the only one to make it out alive. Am I the reason those men are dead? I looked around and saw the forest that surrounded the mine's entrance. No, it wasn't my fault. We have someone who is supposed to look out for us. We should have been warned of seismic activity, of a fault in the support beams. There should be rescue teams ready to look for survivors, but I was alone. There should be something, anything, but there was nothing. I stood up in a blind rage, ready to hold the safety manager responsible for the hundreds of deaths on his hands. Where was our warning? Why was the shuttle locked? Where are the first responders? The safety manager's office was located in a lodge, just to the south of the mine's entrance. But when I went to go find it, the whole thing was gone. Not just that, either. As I looked around, I realized the entire mining outpost had just up and vanished. I thought surely I must have been mistaken. I must have been disoriented. How could a centuries-old mining outpost just up and vanish? I walked around the property for it must have been hours. It was barren. No crew, no remnants of the outpost, nothing at all. How could that be, when I had just seen it on my way in that morning? The only thing that remained was the dirt road that led back into town. I climbed on top of a small hill, and I shouted for anyone who could hear me. I shouted that there had been a collapse. I shouted that I needed help. No response. Nothing. There was nothing. I was utterly stunned. How had this happened? As I examined the area further, I realized the forest looked overgrown and completely untouched. Full-grown trees had appeared in place of the buildings that were once there. It didn't make any sense. Did I get lost somehow? Defeated, I sat on the dirt road, took my helmet off, and just tried to think about what I could possibly do next. The gold mine was deep within a remote forest, at least 30 miles from any sort of civilization. I had no food, water, nor shelter, and given how strangely abandoned the outpost was, I wasn't sure if anyone would ever come to help me. Ultimately, I resolved that, no matter how far, the roads could lead me home. I began what would have been a long trek back to town, but after about 15 minutes of walking, the road just abruptly cut off. And, as a matter of fact, there was no discernible path forward at all. A chill ran over me, and I could feel the blood drain from my face. My breathing became shallow, and I wiped the trickling sweat off my forehead. All I could feel was a deep inner loneliness, a deep dark feeling of hopelessness in my chest and stomach. Everyone I could call for help was gone. There was no contact with the outside world, and no way back home. My sense of direction had been turned completely upside down, and there was hardly any evidence that any humans anywhere were ever here at all. By then noon had passed, and I realized I would likely spend the night in the wilderness. I slumped down there in the dirt road and tried to keep from just crying. I even started to question my own manhood. Who was I? I don't know how to survive such conditions. I rushed to claim that shuttle all for myself, and for what? So that I could starve out here? What had I ever aspired for? Pipe dreams of becoming a great inventor? I had nothing to show for that, but debt and shame. I fell into despair. I not only killed those men, I saved myself for nothing. I wallowed in self-pity, cursing the prosperity of my own life. But, ultimately, it was a brief despair. I was never one to believe that much could come from negative thought. I needed to live, not just for myself, but for the men that I robbed of their chance at escape. Maybe I didn't deserve survival, but how else would I justify taking that shuttle? I had to try. I pulled myself together and took inventory. I was lacking, but I had more than nothing. A pickaxe, a miner's helmet, a jumpsuit, work boots, and socks. I admired my pickaxe. It was a worn and familiar tool of mine. It wasn't an ideal survival tool, but now it was my only friend. If I used it creatively, I figured, I could use it to collect lumber or dig a burrow. I weighed my options, trying to decide which task would be less demanding. Felling trees using a pickaxe would be a slow and laborious task, but digging a sufficient burrow seemed like a fantasy in itself. In the end, I decided on a compromise. I would dig a large hole and then cover it with logs and brush. Not quite a burrow, not quite a lean-to, but it just might work. I swung my pickaxe at the soft ground where the dirt road terminated, hoping that if anyone were to come check on the state of the mine, they'd find me there. As I swung at the dirt, I got flashes of what had happened only some few hours ago. It was just earlier today I was chipping away at the schist, and now they were all dead. With every swing I heard their screams, saw their faces, the blood pouring from the jagged glass. Tears rolled in my eyes, and I had to stop swinging. I left my pickaxe to sit on its head while I walked away, covering my mouth as my lips trembled. The burning in my throat made me question if I were a murderer. A heat shot up the back of my neck and covered my head. I threw my helmet off to try and escape it, but I couldn't escape the thoughts. What right did I have to be here playing survivalist? I finally broke down into sobs, pleading for their forgiveness. I never wanted this to happen. I would double my debt if it meant bringing them back. It wasn't until I noticed the length of my shadow that I knew I couldn't afford to dwell on this. It was getting later by the second, and the self-pity was getting me nowhere. I huffed, wiped the dirt off my face, and with trembling breaths, I walked to retrieve my helmet. There was work to be done. I grabbed my pickaxe that waited for me dutifully, and returned to digging. The soil was dense and tangled with roots, making each stroke a battle. Still, I found a rhythm, breaking the earthen soil with the pointed end and then scraping it out with the flat side. And when my pick failed, I dug with my bare hands, clawing away at dirt and roots like an animal. Slowly, the hole started to take form as an irregular oval just big enough to shelter me. As I cleaved through the earth, the soil began to change in its form. The fertile topsoil gave way to hard chunks of stone and rigid pockets of damp clay. My pickaxe proved effective in dealing with both, even if not the ideal tool. The minutes flew by as I worked like a man possessed. As I dug into the 3rd foot of depth, the earth changed once again. The rocks and roots that had slowed my progress higher up were now scarce, replaced by denser, unyielding clay. It absorbed blows from my pickaxe like tree sap, and even a modest amount of the clay proved to be quite heavy. Slow and grueling, it was somewhat miserable work, but with persistence, the burrow grew deeper. For good measure, I tried my best to set the clay off to the side in 3 neat piles. It wasn't of ideal quality, kind of hard and gritty, but clay had many useful applications. So I saved it. As the sun began to set, it started to dawn on me how much time I had spent for a literal hole in the ground. Nevertheless, I kept my spirits high and trusted that I made the right choice. It wouldn't look so pitiful once given proper coverage by lumber and brush. Chopping trees with a pickaxe proved about as impractical as I feared. Hitting the bark with the pointed end made little headway. The flat end was slightly more effective, but chopping even one tree would have taken hours. I started to run out of ideas, and as the shadows grew, so did my anxiety. Sitting back on my heels, I scanned the area, my eyes landing on the exposed roots of a smaller tree. An idea sparked. In the right situation, a pickaxe can often be used as an effective wedge. I kicked the pointed end of the pickaxe under the roots of a dead pine tree. Then, with my full weight, pushed the flat side down to effectively uproot it. This only worked for smaller bushes and trees, but it was all I needed. I took the sturdier and straight dead pine trees that I had collected and dragged them over the top of the burrow. This created a foundation that I then laid pine branches and bushes over to create a relatively solid barrier to the elements. I stood back, arms my hips, and admired my handiwork. The burrow was crude, but it was mine. The sky had turned orange as the sun drifted below the trees, and soon I would need to build a fire. For now, though, I felt content to rest for a few minutes. I sat down briefly to catch my breath, and as I did, I closed my eyes, put my hands in my lap, and took a moment to relax as fully as possible. The breeze blew through my hair, the trees rustled in kind, and for a moment I felt peace, for the first time since I narrowly escaped death. This is also when I noticed, though, just how eerily quiet this forest was. The familiar sounds of singing birds, droning cicadas, and chirping crickets was completely absent. It disturbed me. The forest only goes quiet when animals fear death. I needed a fire now, if I wanted to remain safe. Luckily, the acetylene lamp on my mining helmet could function as a reliable fire starter. I set to work digging a fire pit and surrounded it with stones to make it official. I gathered branches, dry brush, leaves, and pine needles and built a respectable pile of timber. Unfastening my helmet, I carefully unclipped the lamp and began unscrewing the bottom. I was somewhat concerned that I might not have much fuel left, but relief washed over me as I saw the carbide chamber was nearly full. I hadn't used the headlamp much. They were mainly reserved for emergencies or deeper expeditions that I wasn't experienced enough for. I gingerly sprinkled some carbide on the kindling and added water to start the reaction. The sprinkling of carbide fizzed promisingly, so I quickly reassembled the lamp and struck the flint and steel. Sparks erupted and fell into the kindling, but the acetylene failed to ignite. Panic brewed, my chest tightened, my mouth became dry. I tried my best to keep my fears at bay as I continued to strike the flint relentlessly. With every failed attempt, I considered offering the devil my soul in exchange for flames from hell. Running out of options, I added much more carbide to the kindling and started the reaction again. Rather than ask the devil, I made one quick prayer to God, and with all my hope, flicked the flint and steel. Finally, an uproarious cloud of flame engulfed the timber, and a comforting warmth soothed my fears. At last, my camp was complete. I turned the lamp off and let the warm, radiant heat reassure me that I would live to see another day. I relaxed, but it was an uneasy relaxation plagued by confusion and worry. I still could not make sense of it all. All those men dead, and no one but me even knows about it? How could that be? And what bizarre affliction has come to pass in these woods? Why is it so barren and silent? Just as the fuel in my fire pit fully started to burn, the stars began to shine brightly around the clouds. Plumes of smoke and glowing embers ascended into the treetops. I looked up into the sky at the dazzling lights. My father had taught me many of the constellations, but as I studied the stars, I could find none. Had the stars themselves changed position? Then my eyes drifted to the moon, and a sickening dread hit my stomach. The moon was upside down, and an eerie blood red. What sort of place was this? Nothing was as it should be. And another note of disturbance, I was hardly hungry or thirsty. I had spent the day in hours of manual labor, and somehow my appetite was missing. As I tried to make sense of these strange and unsettling details, I heard a rustling behind me. I froze. It was the first sign of life I had encountered since the collapse. What could it be? A deer? I listened carefully, not daring to turn around. Its footsteps were gentle and cautious. The leaves would crunch beneath slow, quiet steps, cease for a moment, and then another step forward. Was it stalking me?
waiting to pounce? A bobcat? A wolf? Ready to face the creature head on, I quickly turned my whole body around. Finally, I saw it. It was not a bobcat, or a wolf, or any creature that I recognized. It was something else entirely, alien and nearly incomprehensible to me. It was a white, hairless creature with shifting black stripes and spots all over its body. It walked on three bony legs that connected into a head at its top. The only feature on the head itself was a single red eye with a dark black pupil. At its midsection there were flaps of skin that stretched and contorted to match the movements of its legs. Its feet were sharp pegs that poked into the ground as it stepped. I was frozen in fear. It was looking directly at me and approaching slowly. Did it want to eat me? I gripped my pickaxe with both hands and slowly lifted it to rest on my shoulder. If it got much closer, I was going to swing. The monster drew near, and I could hear its breathing. Steady, wheezing breaths, accompanied by low, quiet squeaks and chirps. I backed away slowly, backing up my heels an inch at a time. As I did, the creature diverted from me slightly, and I realized it was not looking at me, but at my fire. The flames danced in the reflection on its eye, and as it walked into the radiant heat, it stopped and stared in clear fixation. I stood still and observed. It didn't seem interested in me at all. After a few seconds, the creature started to gurgle, and then emitted a loud, chittering screech. The sound was unlike anything I had ever heard. It was a certain type of wail, punctured with sharp clicks and chitters. The sound was frightening and irritating, but had a pattern similar to Morse code. Startled, I launched at the creature with my pickaxe while screaming, "Get away! Go!" I seemed to startle the creature in return. It screeched loudly and stumbled back. As it did, its white and black coloring changed suddenly. In rapid succession, the creature turned completely white, then completely black, and then took on the pattern of forest leaves and tree bark. Its ability to camouflage itself was remarkable. Even within the light of the fire, it looked completely invisible before it ran away. As the fire dwindled to smoldering ashes, I wondered if I could possibly sleep after witnessing such a thing. I clipped my carbide lamp back in place in my helmet and lit it to see clearly. I was able to crawl into my shelter fairly easily, and the logs provided a reasonable ceiling. I had made the burrow just roomy enough to lay with relative comfort, and the cool, deep soil provided a decent bed. I didn't drift to sleep peacefully, but after some time without being disturbed, I did finally get some unsettled rest. However, I awoke soon to a stern voice. It was still nighttime, and so quiet I could hear this interloper's breath. I froze in fear, hoping they would just leave. What was it that they said again? Get up. It was a female voice. Get up and come out with your hands up, she said. I hesitated. Part of me was relieved. There was another person, finally. I thought maybe she was part of a search and rescue team. But she spoke in such a threatening tone, it felt more like a raid. I heard her kick at the roof of my burrow. Come on! You think a bunch of wood is going to stop a bullet? Get out of there! Okay, I responded. I'm coming out. Don't hurt me. I crawled out to see she was pointing a bright light at me. I shielded my eyes, but the light blinded me until my eyes adjusted. As I was able to see her more clearly, I saw her light was actually attached to a rifle, and I made out a vague, feminine form holding it. Hands up, she said in a stern tone. Right, okay, I said, still groggy and coming to my senses. I did as she demanded and put my hands into the air. Hand over everything you have, she said. I sighed. I don't really have much of anything, just what I'm wearing. Her rifle lowered slightly, before being firmly trained on me again. She spoke with a more skeptical, inquisitive tone this time. How did you get here? My arms relaxed a bit as I got tired of holding them in the air. Hands up high, she interrupted me. I extended my arms as high as they would go and continued. I'm a miner for the Pelican Gold Mine. There was a massive collapse, and I'm the only one left alive, as far as I can tell. Gold mine? She said. I stammered a little. Yes, a gold mine. The gold mine. The Pelican Cove gold mine. In Mount Tempest? Surely you've...
She interrupted again. No, I've never seen a mine around here. Is anyone else with you? I was surprised by this. The Pelican Gold Mine in Mount Tempest was the most famous mining operation on the continent. Practically everyone knew about it, but I answered anyway. Yes, the Pelican Gold Mine. There were hundreds of miners employed there, I said solemnly. They're probably all dead now. Any other survivors would be trapped and inaccessible. I shuddered at the thought. I would have rather been crushed than trapped and doomed. I shook off the dark thoughts and continued. I'm the only one who made it out alive, I said. She said nothing, and though I couldn't see her face, I could sense some hesitation. Her rifle progressively aimed lower, and her shoulders started to relax. But she still wasn't backing down. She just stood there, thinking, maybe trying to decide what to do next. I decided to fill the silence. Look, I really have been through hell out here. I don't know what's happened, where the mining outpost has gone, or what kind of strange place I wandered into. Everyone I could possibly ask for help has disappeared. I have nothing on me, aside from my work equipment. If you can help me find my way back to civilization, I'll give you anything you want. Please, just name your price. She was still silent, and I started to get the feeling she wasn't even listening to me. How long have you been out here? She asked. I've been working in the mine for about 6 years, I said. No, she said. I mean, how long have you been out here, in this forest? Just tonight, I said. Ugh, she exclaimed, dropping her rifle completely. Seriously? She continued. This is seriously your first night here? I gave her a confused look. I don't understand. You really don't realize how screwed you are, do you? She said, pointing her gun to the ground and putting her hand on her hip. I said nothing. I had been holding my arms in the air for some time now, so I slowly started to relax them. Okay, she sighed. Gather some firewood. I have a lot to tell you. I protested. I really need to sleep. I have the gun. Gather firewood, she demanded as she took a seat by my fire pit. Needless to say, I did as she said. Once the fire was roaring again, we both had some mutual ambient light. I could see her face in the dim orange of the burning flame. The first thing that struck me is that she was far younger than I expected. She looked to be just under 20. She had slightly tanned skin, with flecks of mud and dirt scattered over her cheeks, forehead, and clothes. Her face was round, but somewhat gaunt. She had dark lines under her eyes, and she looked like she didn't eat or sleep much. Her dark irises emanated a subtle glow of consideration, but with a growing desperation behind them. Her clothes hung loosely off her body. Her baggy pants seemed to be held up by a tightly fastened belt alone. She was wearing a plain white tank top with blue cargo pants and muddy black boots. To me, with all things considered, she looked like an experienced survivalist. She sat opposite of me in front of the fire. As she sat down, she sighed and said, "Okay." She sat with her right knee up, cradling her rifle in her left arm with it pointing upward. Her right arm rested on her knee, and she looked at me with squinted eyes. I also noticed she was wearing a backpack, and next to it, tied to the side of the backpack, was a strange glowing blue tube, unlike any device I'd ever seen. Her posture told me she intended to speak with me frankly. We sat there in silence for quite a few seconds, while she thought about what to say. She checked her fingernails for dirt, rubbed her forehead, sighed, and then said, "All the things you're talking about, the mines, the people, the pelican on Mount Tempest, or whatever it was that you said, there's no going back to that. At some point along the way, you crossed into this place, and now there's no going back to where you were." I quirked my head, confused. What do you mean? We're in the Tempest Forest at the base of Mount Tempest right now, aren't we? She shook her head. No, this isn't any normal forest. I don't think this is even Earth. I listened closely. In truth, I began to question if she was reliable. She seemed of sound mind, and she certainly seemed to believe what she was saying herself, so I continued to listen. She proceeded. For me, it started after a car accident. I was only 14. My parents died, and I was the only survivor.
I tried waiting for help. I tried reviving my parents. I tried reviving the people in the other car. I tried getting my phone to work. None of it worked. And then I just started surviving. That was 5 years ago. I ran my fingers through my hair in astonishment. 5 years, I said in disbelief. Did I hear that right? She closed her eyes and nodded. I'm sure you've already noticed. This place is not like the world you left. Things don't make sense here. Things you thought were there just disappear, and sometimes there are others. Usually they aren't friendly, so I steal from them. I leaned in and looked at her with rapt attention. When she saw my intent gaze, she looked away, discouraged. If you're looking to me for answers, then I'm sorry. I don't know either, she said. All I know is that it's bad out here. There are things you have to look out for. Like strange creatures? I said in recognition. Yes, then you've already seen one. How about the giant? She said calmly. My blood ran cold. No, not a giant. I saw something strange, but a giant? She leaned in, setting her rifle down and resting her arms on her knees. She sighed and said, It only comes out at night, and it towers over the trees. It's hard to get a good look, but I've seen shadows of it in the red moonlight. On the sides of mountains, across big, wide valleys, I've seen it stumbling around. It has a head like an elk, antlers and all. They must be as big as trees. It stomps around aimlessly, and every now and then I'll hear the screams of some poor soul he's picked up, and then he just carries them away. Who knows what happens to them? She started to close herself more, pulling her legs in and clutching them harder. I could see her long, dirty fingernails dig into her pants. Every so often, it'll let out this deep, loud groan like a wail. To me, it sounds painful, like it's injured and in pain, but her voice trembled and she struggled to continue. She gasped a few times, stammered as she struggled to speak, but then sat in silence, unable to describe what she saw. She had endured 5 long years of trauma, and it was clear to me she had accepted that the forest would take her life one day. Her genuine fear and despair left an impression on me, and I wanted to save her, to work together and save both of us. I knew in my soul that was the only option. Can I ask your name? I said. She huffed and shuddered as she caught her breath and regained her composure. Cindy, she said, or Cynthia, whichever. Cindy, I replied. I'm Bob, or Robert, if you'd prefer. I paused, unsure on how to respond to her story, but finally I found the words. What you've told me is, I might not believe you if it weren't for all the strange things I've already encountered. I picked up a stick and poked at the fire. Glowing ash fluttered into the air, and the flame roared to life with bright yellow light. This place, I said, as I tended to the fire. It seems unforgiving and hellish, but you don't have to face this alone, Cynthia. I think we'd have a better chance if we worked together. She continued to look away and made some quiet stammers as she reflected on the proposal. Then she responded properly. You don't understand, she said. How can I trust you're even real? I've been tricked by this place so many times. I'm sorry, I won't be fooled again. That was reasonable. In truth, there were reasons I shouldn't have trusted her either, but I didn't have anything to lose. She did. What if I gave you my lamp? I said, holding up my helmet. What? She said, confused. Well, if I were out to torture you, I don't think I would make your survival easier, right? I stood up and sat next to her, handing her my helmet. She took it and examined it. You already have your own lamp, I said, looking over at the light on her rifle. But you could use my lamp to start fires and the other one to see. You could conserve fuel that way. After examining the mechanisms on top of the lamp for a moment, she seemed confused and frustrated. How does this thing even work? She said. It's a carbide lamp. I reached over to show her how to use it. You turn this lever here to control the amount of water that mixes with the carbide in the bottom. Then you light the acetylene with this flint and steel. I sparked the lamp. The flint and steel scratched, sparked, and the small, bright flame ignited. Wow, it's brighter than I thought it'd be, she remarked. Brighter than my flashlight, even. Now I was confused. Your what? I said. My light, she replied. She pulled out a long black cylinder from her backpack, and with the click of a button, it lit up instantly. Wow! I exclaimed. And I thought I was showing you something impressive. How does that work? She laughed a bit. It just runs on batteries. I looked at her with squinted eyes as I tried to understand. Batteries? She turned the light off and unscrewed a cap on top of the cylinder, revealing small metal capsules contained within. Yeah, like these, she said. She handed me one. I held it in the palm of my hand, and it was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was wrapped in a label, covered in writing, and what appeared to be a brand name. I failed to see how this could produce light. I assumed it must contain some kind of chemical fuel, like my lamp. I attempted to unscrew it to examine its contents, but it seemed to be a solid capsule. There was no method by which it could be opened or examined. I held the battery up to her. This can make light? I asked. How? How does it work? She paused and huffed to herself. I don't really know how batteries work, man. They have acid in them or something, and it makes electricity. That's about all I got. That's remarkable, I responded, astonished. I've never heard of an acid-fueled lamp. I handed the battery back to her. This truly is a strange place. She laughed again. Yeah, no kidding. Then she handed my helmet back to me. Look, Bob, I appreciate the offer, but I already have a lighter I've been using to make fires. She took a deep breath. I don't know about working together, but I trust you for tonight. Is it okay if I sleep here? Yes, of course, I said, trying to hide the excitement in my voice. Space might be a little limited, but I think my bro can. No, that's all right, she responded. I'll just sleep by the fire. Are you sure? I asked. Yeah, that's normally what I do anyway. All right then, I spoke with some hesitance, feeling the need to insist she take shelter. But our rapport was already precarious. I continued. If anything happens, just scream. I wake like a cat. I'll come rushing to help you. I definitely won't be quiet if anything happens to me, Bob. You can be sure about that. She replied as she unrolled the sleeping bag tied under her backpack. Feeling resolute, and with some hope at finding an unlikely ally, I went back to sleep a little more peacefully than before. While our circumstances seemed bleak, I felt confident we could claw our way back home somehow, even if it did take years. I awoke to spots of sunlight shining through my imperfect ceiling. The forest, even during the day, was absent of most sound. I recognized the smell of cooking meat. I crawled out of my burrow to see that Cindy was cooking 2 dead crows over the open fire. I was hungry, but considering I hadn't eaten since the previous day, I felt I was less hungry than I should have been. Where'd you find those? I asked, my morning voice croaking out of my throat. I trapped them yesterday. She had impaled them on a sharpened stick and was rotating their plucked and gutted bodies over the fire. Turns out there are birds here. They're just very quiet, she said, before removing them from the fire. Turning them to see if they were thoroughly cooked, and then held them over the flames again. Does it also take a long time for you to get hungry out here, or is it just me? She asked. I am hungry, I said. But yes, though I haven't eaten for an entire day, I'm not sure I have the appetite for roasted crow. She laughed. Well, get used to it. We eat what we find out here. She continued tending to the crow, poking the meat and examining it closely. The good news is, I think we require less food to survive here, for some reason. She grabbed the second stick and impaled one of the crows on it before handing it to me. It's not breakfast in bed, but I recommend you eat what you can, she said, before handing me my serving. I took it reluctantly. I didn't expect fine dining, but there were many other creatures I would have preferred to sustain myself on. I blew on it and let it cool as I worked up the courage to take my first bite. That's interesting and strange, I said. But it's good news. Finding food was something I was concerned about. The less we need, the better. She took a large bite from the crow, pulling meat off of its skeleton and picking ribs out of her mouth. And then she talked with her mouth full. Yeah, from what I gather, that's how it works. I hardly eat that much, and it's not really a problem. She seemed unfazed by her less than palatable meal. She really had been here a long time.
I finally pushed myself to take my first bite. I took a small, trepidatious nibble. The meat was thin and tough, and the bird's bones broke off easily, even with the most gentle bite. But all that aside, it tasted like chicken. "So, Bob," Cindy said, about halfway finished with her bird, "tell me about yourself. How did you end up here?" She asked the question earnestly, but I saw a squint in her eyes, a look of suspicion, like she was prepared to sniff out any lies I might tell. I cleared my throat and picked bones out of my mouth before I replied. "Well, I'm, or maybe was, a gold miner. I mine gold for Pelican Co." "Gold miner, huh?" Cindy replied. "That seems like a really hard job. Is that what you wanted to be?" I sighed and leaned back to look up at the rustling treetops. I reflected upon where I was in life. I thought about all the things I was worried about before. Everything always seems so important when you're mired in it. "No," I finally answered. "The mines are harsh, dark, and dangerous. The hours are long and the pay is better than other places, but still not quite worth it." Cindy finished her bird, threw the remaining skeleton aside, and licked her fingers clean. She pondered. "Why did you stay then?" "Oh, well," I said, before I stopped to consider how much I should share. She was a stranger, after all. If she was right that there was no return, I didn't have much a reason to keep the secret anyway. "I'm not exactly proud of this," I said, embarrassed, "but I need to pay off a loanster." Her eyebrows furrowed at me as I went to take another bite of crow. "What's a loanster?" she asked. I grimaced as I forced myself to swallow the unpalatable bird. You know, the heat of embarrassment creeped up the back of my head. I rarely shared this with anyone, and being forced to explain it, I realized just how ashamed I actually was. I scratched my head to ease the heat and continued. "Someone who gives you a loan that isn't legally sanctioned." "Oh!" Cindy exclaimed. "You mean like a loan shark?" "Loan shark?" I asked. "Yeah, like a mafia guy that threatens to break your kneecaps unless you pay him back, that kind of thing," Cindy said before smacking a mosquito off of her arm. I sat stunned at her bluntness for a beat before I continued. Yes, that's about right. I've always called them loansters. They're loan sharks where you're from? I kind of like that." Tired of looking at the crow I was meant to eat, I took as big of a bite as I could stomach and threw the rest in the fire. "Yeah, wow," Cindy continued. "So you're mining gold to pay off the mob then? That's pretty badass, Bob. Why'd you take the loan in the first place?" I wasn't quite sure what bad ass meant at the time. I concluded it must be an admonishment of how bad my choices actually were. I sighed again. "Oh, childish dreams, I suppose. I like to tinker and fix things, so I wanted my own watch shop. The loanster overheard me one night at the bar and offered to make my dreams a reality. He gave me a huge cash loan. I opened the watch store and I frowned and looked at her. It just didn't turn a profit. So, off to the mines I went." There was a brief moment of silence, a mourning for my lost hopes and dreams, until Cindy broke the silence. "Man," she said, "that sucks. I'm sorry to hear that, Bob." She looked down in silence for another beat, but then continued. "But on the bright side, you don't really have to worry about loan sharks anymore. You totally beat those guys." I laughed somewhat anxiously. "I suppose," I said, "but somehow that isn't much of a consolation." Our conversation lulled for a moment, and a cool wind blew over us in the fire. Until finally I came to my senses and realized I should ask about her, too. "What about you?" I asked. "Who were you before you ended up here?" "Me?" she asked before groaning and looking off into the woods. Truth is, I don't really like to talk about it. It was so long ago, I turn into a mess if I think about it too hard." She laughed nervously. "Maybe it wasn't fair for me to ask about you." "No," I reassured her. "I understand. You don't have to." "I wanted to be a photographer.
she blurted out. I like to take pictures of nature, and sure enough, tears began to well in her eyes almost instantly, and her voice began to tremble. And on the trip where we crashed, she covered her mouth as the tears started to flow. You don't need to tell me, Cindy, I said softly, but she continued. Now sobbing, she forced the words out through heaving breaths and painful gasps. It was for me. She shuddered and sobbed. They were taking me camping because I wanted to take pictures. It's all my fault. She crumpled on the ground, sobbing and in pain, but with some sense of relief that she could finally confess to someone. All for pictures, she squeaked out in shame as she continued her anguished crying. Cindy, I said flatly, and when I didn't quite get her attention, I said it again. Cindy! What? Cindy said through gasps and sniffles. When the mine collapsed, everyone was trying to escape. It was chaos, and the shuttle was locked. I broke the window down and took the shuttle all for myself. All those men are dead because of me. I... We make choices in the moment, sometimes without knowing what will happen, or what else we can do instead. I didn't know what else to do, and you didn't know how that trip would end. It's okay. I spoke earnestly and from the heart, believing every word I said. She cried harder, but when she could speak, she softly whispered, Thank you. I slid to sit by her and patted her on the back supportively. We're in this together, and we'll get out of this together. That's my promise. It took some time for her to compose herself. She wiped her puffy eyes and runny nose and said, There's more I should tell you. She took a deep breath and continued, I know a bit more about this place than I led you to believe. I raised an eyebrow. It was subtle, but her tone told me there was a hint of guilt. Oh? I said. Well, go on then. I got most of my supplies off of a skeleton I found in the woods, she said, coldly, with a nonchalance that chilled me to the bone. He had a journal, she continued, and he wrote a lot about this place. Seems like he was some kind of scientist or explorer or something, and he was studying this place. I couldn't understand a lot of it, but the way he described his home, he lived in a world very different from both of ours. She went silent, as did I, and the crackling fire was all that reverberated in the air. I couldn't really come to any sort of satisfying answer, she continued, but I think this place is some kind of intersection. In my world they have lights powered by batteries. In yours they have carbide lamps and lonesters. Cindy reached over to her backpack and unlatched the strange blue cylinder I noticed earlier. His name was Godwin Wright, and in his world they have stuff like this. It was a strange-looking thing. Getting a better look at it, I could see that it had a handle and a trigger, similar to a gun. But unlike any weapon I had ever seen, the top was covered in a tree-shaped arrangement of black squares, and at the end of the cylinder was a nozzle. I've only used this thing once, Cindy said. I've read his whole notebook by now, and I still don't really understand most of it. Cindy held the strange device in both arms. It appeared to be somewhat heavy, but what I did figure out is that this thing is dangerous. She laid the weapon across her lap. He called it a plasma pulse cannon, she said. It doesn't use any sort of regular ammo. It uses the sun. These squares on the top are solar panels. They charge the thing with sunlight. Kind of similar to the batteries I showed you, I guess. She stood up, walked a few feet away to a nearby sunny area, and placed the cannon down in the sunlight. I've only fired it one time, just to see what it could do. She looked back at me with a knowing look. It delivered. She paced back and forth with some excitement as she explained. It blew me away. Literally. It kicked so hard it knocked me on my back. She gestured as if her hands were puppets, reenacting the story. I fell flat on my back, and plasma shot into the sky, and it was so bright I couldn't see anything. She walked back over to the fire to sit back down, then continued. When the blast was over, and I could finally stand back up, everything that it was pointed at was destroyed. The trees, the treetops, everything. The power of the device created a mix of fear and excitement in her voice.
I could see behind her eyes she was thinking of all the possibilities. The amount of control it gave her in a place where she was otherwise powerless both frightened and exhilarated her. Would she use it for good, or would she be drawn to abuse it? I got the sense she didn't know the answer herself. I swallowed with a dry throat and spoke in a wavering tone. A gun that strong is beyond my realm of comprehension. How could this Godwin come into possession of such a thing? This is something from his world? What does that mean exactly? I don't really get it either, she responded. He called this place that we're in the esoteric zone, and he kept using terms like novel realities and alternate timelines. I didn't understand the science behind it, but I think the three of us, you, me, and Godwin, are all from very different places. Places we couldn't normally just go to physically. We. These aren't just normal woods. There's something weird going on here. Something that connects us in ways we shouldn't be able to connect. At least that's what I got from this journal. As she spoke, her tone became hollow and philosophical, pondering upon the nature of the darkness in this so-called esoteric zone. That's troubling, was all I said. I suddenly felt so small, so inconsequential to this world we knew so little about. Not only was there so much I did not know, there were these totally different realms or realities with wonders beyond anything I could imagine. Cindy's batteries and acid-powered lamp were proof of that. I've been charging it in the sun every day, Cindy said suddenly, with sinister slyness in her voice. I was surprised she planned to use it at all. Something so destructive seemed to me to be more trouble than it was worth. But she was a survivalist. Maybe she knew something I didn't. Perhaps sensing my silence in response, Cindy explained further. In his journal, he intended the cannon to be a precaution against the giant. And if that's the case, I don't want to be caught with a dead cannon. She relayed this to me coldly, sternly, but with that explanation I relaxed somewhat, and even admired her perseverance. Even if she hadn't been born for this world, she had grown into it, and I admired that. With our camp now meant for two, we spent the day building her burrow like mine. Cindy, though, wasn't one for long stretches of manual labor. She was prone to distraction and eventually wandered off to hunt instead. I was frustrated at first, but I held my tongue. Food was just as essential as shelter, so I couldn't complain. 3 rifle shots echoed through the trees, and for a moment I got excited at meat more fit for eating than a crow. But she returned empty-handed, and her face was drooping in disappointment. One of those things, she said, her voice low. It jumped in and snatched my kill. We, or mostly I, had finished her shelter by that night, and now our camp was beginning to shape into a reliable base. That night we found ourselves talking about home. We talked about worlds that felt distant and impossible. Cindy spoke of machines I could hardly understand, automobiles that sped faster than any steam train, colossal ships that crossed oceans in days, and invisible rays of light that let people communicate from all over the world. Oil seemed to power it all. Everything, from our house's lights to the planes in the sky. Massive flying machines that average people used for travel, electrical grids that lit people's homes. It was all powered by oil they dredged up out of the earth. She even showed me her phone, which was unlike any telephone I had ever seen. It was decidedly flat, with no discernible ear or mouthpiece. She explained that this functioned exactly like a telephone from my world, but could be kept on your person and used anywhere. That in itself was already a piece of technology I thought to be impossible. I could not bear witness to this, though, because contacting others required some sort of signal. As she described it, there were waves of light in the air that were invisible, waves that somehow allowed your voice to transmit across long distances without a direct line of connection. We were apparently lacking in signal, so could not contact anyone. Still, the device turned out to be much more than just a telephone. It had a little bit of everything. It could authentically record any moment in time in the form of photographs and even moving pictures. The device also held music, games, and the ability to send written messages. There was seemingly endless utility in such a small device. It was a tiny window into her world, and already I was overwhelmed. As she was getting carried away, showing me all that her phone was capable of, she remembered something. She stopped herself and said, "Oh, hold on. Check this out." Then navigated into her collection of moving pictures that she had personally recorded. I saw in the directory glimpses of what each photograph contained. I saw that she had recorded many of her experiences here. She didn't remark on them, but I saw horrific glances of strange creatures, a couple of bloody faces, human remains, and random snippets of scenic forest imagery. Up until she found what she was looking for. "Here it is," she said, as she played the moving picture. At first I couldn't discern much. The recording was shaky, and I could hear Cindy breathing heavily. I got blurry glimpses of the forest floor, the night sky, the red moon, and then the camera pointed at what Cindy was trying to record, and it focused. It was the giant, shambling across a distant mountain. Massive, dark, and monstrous, it dragged its hooven feet across the forest floor, scarring the earth with every step. "My God!" I exclaimed. I clutched her phone and looked closely. Its eyes were glowing orange, and the rest of it was a silhouette in the darkness. The full detail of the beast was obscured by the red moonlight behind it. With each step, its booming stomp could be heard, even in the distant recording Cindy had taken. Cindy was behind the camera, and I could see that she was hiding behind a tree as she recorded it. I could also hear her muttering things like, "Oh my God," and "Holy shit," as she witnessed the horror before her. The beast walked up to the top of the mountain, took a deep breath, and then wailed, just like Cindy described. It was a loud, melancholic roar, a reverberating cry with notes of anger and frustration. It was a roar of both rage and sorrow. The roar was loud to begin with, but as the beast sustained the sound, it became louder and louder, and at the peak of its loudness the camera shook, and that was where it ended. I got too scared to keep going. Cindy laughed nervously as she put her phone away. "But see, I told you it was real." I never necessarily doubted she was telling the truth, but now I had no choice but to believe that this giant was real, and I understood now why she would hold on to Godwin's cannon. In my world, things were simpler. Steam engines ran on wood and charcoal, and our automobiles, though impressive in their own way, could barely reach a fraction of the speeds Cindy spoke of. We had steam-powered buses that chugged along at a leisurely pace, and trucks that rattled through the dusty trails of our mining operation, but they had little application outside of industry and public transportation. We simply didn't have machines that could launch us across oceans or leap into the skies. For long distances, we relied on trains. In the more remote areas, a horse was often the best option. And as for flight, well, we had nothing like airplanes. Just hot air balloons that drifted lazily through the air. More of a novelty than a necessity. We had begun to dabble with steam-generated electricity by the time I had left, but it was nothing like the glowing cities Cindy described. In truth, our worlds were different in every imaginable way. Day-to-day life, the very shape of our continents, even how we thought about machines. What seemed ordinary to her was almost unthinkable to me. More than anything, I wanted to make it back home to the world I knew. But there was something profound about sitting here with Cindy, sharing stories from a place I could barely imagine. No one from my world would ever get to experience this. And if I had the chance, if there was a way I could go back and forth, I think I'd like to see her world with my own eyes, to stand in the cities she spoke of, and to feel the pulse of a world that had gotten so fast. Our night together stretched on until our conversation lulled into a comfortable silence. As the fire crackled between us, our eyelids grew heavy, and we finally decided to sleep. I found myself grateful in ways I hadn't expected. I couldn't imagine facing the night alone, without Cindy, where the fear would be gnawing at me silently in the dark. Even though I lay in the dirt, as rough and cold as ever, sleep came easily. For the first time since the collapse, I felt hope rise within me. Unfortunately, that sleep wasn't peaceful for long. I was roused slowly at first. I tossed and turned as some peculiar feeling refused to let me drift back to sleep. I could feel subtle, rhythmic tremors in the ground, and then fear gripped me, I jolted awake. I rolled over and put my ear to the ground, stilled my breath, and listened. Silence, and then a deep tremble of the earth, followed by silence, and then another tremble. They were footsteps. There was no doubt. As if on cue, I heard Cindy hiss at me in a whisper, "Bob, wake up!" "I'm already awake," I replied. "I hear it too." "I think he's coming this way," she said with a growing sense of alarm in her voice. A hollow moan reverberated through the night, shaking the very air. The footsteps were louder, heavy, and deliberate. He was coming fast. "The cannon!" I said. "Ready the cannon. This might be the time to use it." I heard her scrambling across the dirt and unstrapping it from her backpack as I crawled out from my shelter. "Your rifle," I said. "I'll use your rifle. Where is it?" She held the cannon in her arms uneasily, trying to maintain a steady grip as her arms shook. "It's in my room." I reached down into her burrow quickly and pawed around until I found the rifle. The stomping was now accompanied by the sound of trees bending and moaning before snapping in half under the weight of this impending monster. Cindy flipped a switch on the side of her cannon, and the whole thing came alive. It let out a strange, high-pitched whine and hummed with power. Its usual blue glow turned twice as bright, illuminating our camp better than any fire ever could. Even when not being used, the sheer power it possessed made the whole thing vibrate in her arms. Cindy's breath came in ragged gasps. I don't know if I can do this. What if I miss? What if one of us gets hurt?" And now I could see the hooves of the thing in the distance, felling trees with each step, dragging its feet across the ground pitifully and leaving a path of wreckage. I stammered, But Cindy, between the two of us, you know how it works." Each thunderous step closed the distance, 20, maybe 30 yards at a time. The ground trembled under its weight, and it cried out again, this time with deafening volume that made us both drop our weapons and cover our ears in pain. Even with both of my hands clasped firmly over my ears, it still rattled my skull with ferocity. I continued, "I've used a rifle before, Cindy. I've never used one of those." She continued gasping for air, running her fingers through her hair. "But what if so much could go wrong? I could miss. I could hurt you. We could die." I grabbed her hands and looked her in the eyes, with the pale blue glow of the cannon as our main source of light. "Cindy," I said calmly, "I trust you can do this. Pick up the cannon, aim it at this beast, and obliterate it." Just as the words left my mouth, a massive hoof slammed into the ground, crushing my beautiful burrow into a crater. The creature bent over, and through the canopy, a bony hand the size of a train car was reaching for me. I pivoted for the rifle, but it was too late. I felt giant fingers clutch me like a child clutching a toy. The sound of Cindy shrieking, "Bob!" was the last thing I heard before being whisked through the treetops and up to the face of true horror. It looked at me, staring me down. Its eyes glowed white like pure crystal balls, and the full blood-red moon sat perfectly between its antlers. I looked into its eyes, its face indeed reminiscent of a mighty elk. Hot, foul air blasted from its snout, ruffling my hair, and it despised everything that made me human. It had a face of rage, the face of pure hatred this strange place bestowed on its visitors. It looked at me as if it hated everything that allowed for my existence, and then it howled at me, so close and so loud that my ears rang fiercely, and I was shaken so violently I nearly drifted out of consciousness. I began to say my prayers when a blinding flash of white light exploded beside me, followed by searing heat that even threatened to burn me. The deafening crack of thunder shook the ground beneath me. I could feel tremendous heat radiating from a wondrous beam of pure power. A beam so bright that it illuminated the entire forest beneath me, and I got a glimpse of the twisted, rotting visage of this giant's face. It looked half-rotten, only partially covered in skin, with exposed bone in many places. It was more than just a beast. It was something unholy. Godwin's mighty beam of plasma struck the creature through its leg and out of its left shoulder. Immediately the air was filled with the stench of burning fur and flesh. I felt its grip tighten around me, and I worried it might crush me. Slowly this incredible beam of light began to move as Cindy directed it through its body. Blood sprayed from the creature's splitting viscera. and immediately it was engulfed in flames. The abomination howled, its fury unrelenting. It was a sound of pure hatred, a sound of refusal at its own defeat. In an instant the immense power of the cannon dissipated, and the giant's flaming body began to fall, with me still in its clutches. Its large, sturdy bones creaked as it collapsed. A boom echoed throughout the forest as its knee collided with the ground, and as its torso hit the ground, so did the hand that was still holding onto me tightly. I landed hard, hard enough to stun me and cause me great pain, but not enough to kill me. I lost consciousness momentarily, but I came to with Cindy's hand slapping my cheek, her voice frantic. I gasped, the weight of the giant's hand still pinning me to the ground. I coughed as I struggled to get free, the air thick with the acrid smoke of burnt flesh. "I'm all right," I finally said. I think I'm all right." Cindy pulled on my arm to help free me. With some effort, I was able to get out of the creature's horrid claws. Cindy hugged me warmly while saying, "Oh my God, holy shit, I can't believe that worked, oh my God." And, despite it all, I started laughing. The laughter of a man who had just seen the face of death and lived to tell the tale. "You did it!" I said. "I told you, Cindy, I told you, and you did it!" We were crying, tears of joy, tears of victory in the face of such doom. Back at the camp, we huddled under the dim glow of Cindy's flashlight, both of us shaken but alive. Cindy recounted the fight, her voice still trembling as she described watching me disappear into the giant's grip. How she saw me get pulled into the darkness of certain death, and how she mustered the resolve to wield such a power. I reciprocated with my side, what I saw of the beast, what I felt as I looked into its eyes, and the amazement of seeing the cannon obliterate such a mighty foe. As we relaxed, she eventually drifted to sleep, clearly exhausted. I lay beneath the stars, the red moon looming like a silent threat. With a quiet click, I turned off Cindy's flashlight, the night settling in around us. I took a long breath, trying to quiet my racing thoughts. For now, we were safe, but who knew what other dangerous monsters were among us? Cindy had been here for 5 years, and we might even be stuck here longer than that. 5 years. Could I live 5 years in a place like this? I was skeptical. But so much beyond what I thought possible had already happened. I never would have thought a place such as this ever existed, so why should an escape also be possible? With that thought, I sat with Cindy, scared, traumatized, but together. And despite it all, I knew, somehow, some way, we could get home. Wow. Okay, yeah, that was Land Where the Red Moon Rises. Pretty interesting story you picked out, Ulu. Um, I hope you guys liked my performance. I'll admit I'm not exactly trained for that, but I did my best. Um, and as for me personally, though, I enjoyed the story. What do you think, Ulu? Do you have any sort of comments you'd like to make now that the story's been told? Okay, so wow. Okay. So Ulu says that the esoteric zone, as referred to by Godwin Wright in the story, the esoteric zone is an intersection of darkness, where uh, the infinite library is an intersection of knowledge and learning. Um, and then he said, I have no further comments other than that. So it seems to me he doesn't really want to explain further what that means. Is that right? Okay, so that's kind of all he has to say about it. I'll say personally, I definitely saw the parallels you were drawing from this. I saw that there were people meeting from very different realities, and they were both seeing things that were foreign to them, but not foreign to the other one. And definitely I related to that on a personal level, given what I've been through. So definitely I got the through line you were making. I'm not sure I quite got that it was an intersection of darkness, and that's kind of an interesting comment to make there, Ulu. I'll ask you a question, and I guess it's up to you if you want to answer it or not. But can you tell us about the reality that this story comes from? I mean, what's kind of the backstory behind this story?
Okay. Wow. Okay. So, Ulu says that this is a memoir. Like in the reality it's from, this is a memoir written by Robert Richmond, who calls himself Bob in the story. Um, okay, he says there are some creative liberties that he took in his reality, but he's actually very famous for his purported. He was a man that went missing for okay, he went missing for several years, and he came back one day and you know told this crazy story to people and eventually wrote it as a memoir and became very famous. Yeah. Okay. Right. But Ulu clarifies though that in our world, in my world, uh, it is just a creative. It's like a fictional story that someone wrote. Okay, interesting. But okay, but wait, but does it actually exist in our reality? Are you saying that from our perspective it's fiction? Okay, interesting. He said that someone in our reality, an unpublished author, an unknown author, has written the first few pages, identical pages of the story, but they never finished the story. So, it, that's trippy. Okay, so it does exist in our world verbatim as someone's fictional story that they just never finished. Huh. That also kind of helps me understand what you were trying to say earlier about how what we read here is going to be both fictional and non-fictional simultaneously, depending on your point of view. That's interesting. So I guess these texts don't necessarily exist in just one reality. Do do they technically exist in every reality? Maybe. Okay. So Uli says not in every reality. They don't. It's not like every text is universal. Otherwise, you'd be able to find it. But sometimes they exist like a lot of stories exist in our reality, in our timeline, but only in the distant future, right? Something like that. Or, they're never created at all in our timeline, or they come from realities that are so different that it would never possibly ever occur in our reality. Stuff like that. Um, I'm paraphrasing a lot there. He explained in a very esoteric way, but am I right? Am I describing this right, Ulu? Okay, he said more or less. All right. Yeah, I can never satisfy you 100%, can I, Ulu? Yeah. Okay. Well, that was episode 1, guys. I hope you liked it, and yeah, hopefully we can get the next episode up by next month. If not next month, maybe a couple months. I don't know. We'll see. But until next time, keep reading, and we'll be back with another tale. Okay, now I'm actually going to drop my character and talk to you a bit as myself, as Sean, the author and creator of everything you just heard. I just wanted to kind of describe exactly what this is going to be since you've listened to the whole thing. Very appreciative that you listened to the entire first episode. Um, so Ulu's Infinite Library is a writing project of mine that I came up with as kind of a home for like a lot of the short stories I've written that I wanted to kind of self-publish, but in a creative way that kind of caught people's attention and also gave it an interesting framework that would keep people coming back not only for the stories that I'm sharing, but also, what Ulu and Adam are up to. Um, my goal and my sort of ultimate dream of this podcast is to have the story with Ulu and Adam progress in kind of an interesting way as the episodes progress, but also sharing a interesting new story every month or however often I can create episodes here. Obviously, there's a lot of work that goes into these. I have to write the story for one, then I have to record, uh, you know, me being Adam and talking to Ulu. I have to make the owl sounds, which is a complicated process. I'm not going to get too in deep in how I do it all or how I did it all, but Needless to say, a lot of work went into this one episode, and it made me a little scared that maybe it wasn't something I could do too frequently. But I'm gonna give it a shot, especially if this gets a good positive reaction. So if you really like this episode and you want me to keep making more, if you like, subscribe, comment, all the typical engagement bullshit that people beg you for and everything now, you know, you know how it is. But it is actually helpful if you do that, because if I see a lot of likes, I see a lot of comments, that shows me that there's enough people that if I keep doing this, I'm going to get more people watching, right? If I get little views, no comments, no likes, then it's going to be like, okay, well, maybe I don't really have, maybe I shouldn't have as much hope for this project as I do. You know what I mean? So that's the first thing. It's a little bit experimental. I understand that, but I'm hoping it's going to be a unique little adventure to follow. So yeah, I hope you liked the first episode. Let me know what you think. If you have any sort of, if there's anything about listening to this that like bothered you, I know maybe the sound quality or my voice acting was a little bit lacking. If you have any kind of like constructive criticism you want to say, like I love the show, but I would be a lot easier to listen if this was different, let me know, because that'll tell me like, maybe I need to invest in better equipment, or maybe I need to do better on the sound mixing, or maybe I just need to slow down a little bit in my reading, or, whatever it is you think needs to be better. All of that is welcome. Hope you liked it. And yeah, I'm going to try and make the next episode as quickly as possible. Thanks so much for listening to the first episode. And yeah, this is Sean signing out.